All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to open up for Unit 4, Economics, Industry, and Labor. This unit's a little bit shorter and it does tie into Unit 3, which we just got done working with in relation to government. Government talked about how we maintain, gain, and resist power in relation to government systems and citizens, and economics is going to tie right into that. So, today, make sure you grab a sheet of paper. It's been a little while since Miss McCrae's given you a notes video, but we're going to rock with it today. So, when we talk about the economy, the definition is the system of production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services within a society. Your intro today asks you kind of like, where does economics live? Where do you think it exists, who buys and does and consumes and all those types of things. So when we talk about the economy, so there are types of economic systems that exist in the world. There are four. There's a traditional economy, command economy, market economy, and mixed economy. And we're going to talk about all four of those today briefly. And if you need to pause or take a moment to get your notes, do so. Okay, so treat yourself to your notes and making sure their notes look good and thorough. So the first thing is what drives the economy forward is going to be scarcity. Okay, and the root word of that is like scarce. So we talk about that it relates to the demand of demand for goods and services. And scarcity is when the demand for a good or a service is greater than the availability of that good or service. So when we talk about scarcity, that ties into unlimited wants, limited resources, turns into scarcity, or that is the idea of scarcity. And then you have to make choices. The choices are what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce. And a reminder, something you want to think about is like, what is a good and what is a service? A service is something that people or individuals in the economy do or provide for someone. So, for instance, if you go get a pedicure or a manicure, if you get your hair done, that's a service. But then a good is if you go to the grocery store and you buy a five avocados. That's a good that you've purchased. And so when we talk about the types of economic systems, and it's gonna show how scarcity kind of plays out. There's traditional, command, market, and mixed. And when we look at traditional economies are very different from the economy like we live in the United States, where we have like production and manufacturing and things like that. Traditional economies are going to be like cottage production, and the root of that is like cottage industry, which is like individuals live at home, and they are produced at home or within a community. So, for an example, I can give you a couple communities, like for instance, the Amish live in a traditional economy. They produce goods and services that benefit the Amish community. And so we talk about that items are produced out of necessity instead of wants, okay? And they also live in a barter system. So bartering, the root for that is trade. So, you may have someone who's a blacksmith and someone who has chickens and they produce eggs, so that they can barter and trade for services and goods. For example, too, in the cottage industry or traditional economy, they're going to have specialization. Like there's someone who's a baker, there's someone who's a carpenter, there's someone who's a butcher or blacksmith. And so in those communities, people specialize in those types of trades to offer and to help lift the community. And that ties into their economics. So when we talk about characteristics of a traditional economic system, it's usually based on small communities, families, or tribes. They could potentially have a hunter-gatherer society. So there's hunting, there's gathering. They rely on bartering, so trade, and then produce what is needed with little waste. You will see even Native American communities live in sometimes traditional economic systems where they trade amongst each other, or historically in the past. Native American communities were based on this as well, and many other communities. As we've moved into the 20th, 21st century, even the 19th century, the people have moved away from traditional economic systems due to innovations, but many groups have still stayed with traditional economic systems. The Inuit community, Native American communities, live in northern Canada, and they are among the few communities that still maintain a traditional economy, which I also think lends itself to their geography because they are further away from larger groups of people. So then when we talk about a command economy is definitely like what it sounds. A command economy means the production and everything is owned and controlled by the government. Government distributes the resources, and there's little to no private property, and there's mostly unskilled labor. And so what they produce, how to produce it, and for whom they produce is all determined by the government. So what to produce is government preference. How to produce is government, like determined by the government and their employees. And for whom to produce is the government preference. So when you see command economies, you're going to see that with systems of government that have more of a dictator or a leader that does not offer many choices for their citizens. So, for instance, like Cuba, China, Russia, when they were the Soviet Union and North Korea have economic systems that are command economies. Um, and so when you look here, Miss M's got a spectrum kind of like what economic systems look like. And so when you're looking, like, North Korea is a communist nation, and so they have more of a command economy. Whereas when you look, the United States and Japan are leaning more on the right side of the spectrum in relation to having like more of mixed economies with some capitalism, some socialism, and also like some command features where the feature of the command would be that the government does decide some of the production. And in relation to a market economy, that's economic decisions are made by individuals. So market economies, they have individuals and companies determine how resources are allocated. Remember, allocated means like how it's like laid out or given out, and goods are distributed. Individuals choose how to invest their personal resources. Like, so for instance, like the citizens in a market economy are allowed to choose and select where they would like to invest their resources. Like, so for instance, for retirement, there's a lot of different ways to prepare for retirement, and citizens in a market economy can decide how they want to lay out their retirement, like whether they save on their own or they put it in an IRA, or if they have like a certain retirement plan. Some people decide if they want to do stocks, things like that. So they have choice with their personal resources, and the government doesn't tell them what to do with that. So the characteristics of a market economy is limited government. So government's still involved, but it's limited. It has some parameters. System of markets and prices. So that deals with supply and demand and how supply and demand are dictated. Like, what's the supply look like and how it drives the prices either up or down. Freedom of choice. I can do what I want to do with my money that I've earned. And then private property, like home ownership, business ownership, land, things like that. And so when we talk about mixed economies as well, they have the elements of market and command economies. So they have like a balanced blend. And many economic decisions are made in the market by individuals. So you have business owners, entrepreneurs, just a regular person who's investing, whether they're looking into stocks or, money market accounts, whatever they do with their funds is what they get to do. And the government also plays a role in like allocation and distribution of resources. So making sure that, people do receive resources if they're needed or where they need to go. Like the U.S. factors of production are typically owned by the private sector, but the government does get involved in decisions. So like, you may have a private company that's producing a certain good, but the government's going to have involvement. Like, for instance, any type of food production may be created by a private company like Gerber or I'm trying to think, like Formula, like Enfamil, all those things. They are created by private companies, but there are government regulations that hold them to making sure things are sanitary, that they're being produced, that no like pieces of machines end up in food. Like I was looking, we have a Food and Drug Administration, which monitors like food production in our country. And the other day I was like looking to see like what was recalled, and there was literally like a food that was recalled because there were metals that had fallen into the food. Does that make sense? And so the government, those food items may be produced privately with a company, but then the government has parameters that they have to adhere by. For instance, OSHA deals with safety. Like Miss McCrae can't stand on a chair at school. If I fall off the chair, that's a workman's comp, or like a liability for my company, which is Pitt County Schools. So that is a parameter like OSHA is created by the government to monitor safety standards in facilities. So when we talk about that as well, government also looks at like infrastructure, like what will be built, where it will be built, how it affects the environment. They pass laws putting regulations on private industry. So like, for example, in the United States, we have minimum wage. Everybody's guaranteed minimum wage. And there's also anti-pollution laws, and there's child labor laws. Now, China is a little bit different because their government lets some of the industries be controlled by market forces. So at the same time, they totally control other like usually like larger industries as well. So China has a little bit of a mixed economy, but they definitely have communist government. So their people don't have as many freedoms and rights as Americans, but they do have more of a blended economy because they even trade with the United States. So those are two examples. So when we talk about a mixed economy, the federal government can safeguard people in markets. The government has a larger role in the military, international trade, and transportation. A couple of things that you'll see that are different though. Market economies have private property, supply and demand equals the price of items, and then driven by self-interest, whereas command economies have federal government can safeguard people and markets. Government may own some key industries, and government can manage social welfare like programs. So just a couple things to think about with that. And those are the four types of government. So we will talk more about economic theories later. Please make sure that you take your notes and you get this information down, because it is going to manifest itself later and you're going to need it. Okay, so just keep that in mind and make sure you pause and take the time. One thing I've noticed, and if you get to this in this video and you're really listening, you're going to know what I said. Please make sure that you are taking thorough notes, because you turn your notes in, and some of you guys are really bonesing it, and it's not beneficial to your learning. So write these things down, because when you write, you absorb information and it becomes more concrete for you. Okay. And I can even put up an article about that, but handwriting these notes and getting them down and spending time and looking at them and taking the time to process them is important to your learning. So make sure you take time to do that. And if you need anything, email me.